So this is going to be a fairly in-depth review about anything and everything that we want to know about caffeine performance-wise, addictions, side effects. So everything is scientifically based. If you know me, you'll know that I'm a bit of a geek. I do have a master's in sport and exercise science, so I do know how to review literature, pick it apart, and read between the lines as and when needed. So here we're going to have a look at everything you need to know about caffeine. So first of all, we need to know, how does caffeine work? Well, caffeine works, first of all, the main misconception is that caffeine gives you energy. That is indeed incorrect. It has no calorific value and it doesn't give you energy. It tricks your brain into thinking you have energy or extra energy. And it does that by blocking your brain from feeling tired. And this is done by stopping adenosine latch on to your A1 receptors in your brain. So we can see this nice little graph here, which I've stolen off examine.com. And adenosine rises when we train hard, when we're in the library studying hard, extensive sort of brain use, so a long day at work, but also throughout the day it will start to increase as well. And when adenosine attaches to the adenosine receptors in our brain, that's when we'll start to feel tired, we'll start to show symptoms of fatigue. Caffeine comes in like, no, and blocks those receptors, will attach to those receptors, and therefore the adenosine can't attach to it, stopping you from feeling fatigued. Throughout the day, those binds, those chemical bonds will break, so the caffeine will get metabolized, so broken down basically, and then those receptors become free again. So then that's why you can start to feel like you crash after you've had caffeine. That's just because its half-life has sort of gone. Now, a half-life for caffeine has been shown to be anywhere from like 1.5 hours up to 10 hours. And this is very interperson specific, so it will change from one person to the other. We'll see a lot of characteristics of that going forward, depending on tolerance and that. So how does caffeine work in regards to fat loss? And this is something where you could potentially argue that caffeine does increase the available energy, as it can manipulate and affect and reduct your respiratory exchange ratio, so that RER there. And this is just going to be a number that tells us if you are burning fat or you're burning carbohydrates as energy, to yield energy, I should say. If you have 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight or higher, there's a substantial increase in fat oxidation, so you're therefore using fat as fuel. This doesn't mean that you're going to lose fat or lose body weight. That will overall come from a calorie deficit. So you don't think, okay, I'm going to start smashing loads of caffeine and it's going to get me shredded and lean, as realistically there's a lot more important things to get in order. But it has some potential there. It can therefore increase performance aerobically, because you're not going to deplenish, you're not going to deplenish, made a new word up there, I think. You're not going to deplete all your glycogen storages as quickly, simply because you are also using fat as fuel. So that is something that is good to know. And also, caffeine is likely to increase your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So there's an argument there that it will increase fat loss, or could increase fat loss. Moving on, we want to see how caffeine can actually benefit all-round performance. And I've highlighted this article here simply because if you throw your head into a load of articles, they're going to throw out a load of scientific jargon, making them feel more intelligent. Basically, isokinetic muscular strength, that just means when you're moving a weight at a uniform speed. So if you were chest pressing, you wouldn't be bouncing it off your chest, you'd be at a very slow and controlled speed. There are machines that will only allow you to go at certain angular velocities to make sure that it is uniform. Is that applicable to the average Joe in the gym? Unfortunately, maybe not, because we don't have that sort of equipment, but it's something to think about, and it can definitely, I'd say, be applied. However, performances have been seen to increase in aerobic performances, so your long distance running, anything that's very repetitive. Power increase, so that's also going to be anaerobic, it's going to be sprinting, that's 1 rep maxes, cleans, jerks. Strength increase, obviously linking to the power, depending on what sort of movement it is. However, there was more research in lower body than there was upper body in strength, and actually a decrease in perceived pain. However, this is going on an individual's own opinion, so a lot of that can change as well. They've been told they have had a high amount of caffeine and that they potentially shouldn't be feeling as much pain, so they might perceive that. A lot of research, when it takes people's opinions or into it, I'm a bit dubious about, just because I'm very much a maths and physics kind of guy compared to qualitative data, but it's been published, so it's obviously a very good study. So clinical doses, for fat oxidation, we've already said we're looking for about 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. For aerobic or anaerobic power output, 3 to 5 milligrams. However, I've put a couple of asterisks there, and I think this is something that we can apply to the whole presentation or just anything scientific, is that there was also papers disagreeing with that and saying there was no change in power output. And I think it just shows that if you search hard enough and long enough, you can always find some piece of information that's going to back up your argument, and you can cherry pick that. I've tried to come into this as level-headed and unbiased as possible, so I did want to bring that up to you, and also say that throughout all of this, there's probably counter arguments that I potentially haven't mentioned. And then the pain decreases ranged from 200 milligrams, so like a one-off dose, uniform 200 milligrams for everyone, all the way up to 10 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, which is again a fairly substantial dosage. 10 milligrams per kilogram of body weight is a high dose. But so their overall performance, you'd be looking at 3 to 6 milligrams was the general gist of findings. So now we're going on to caffeine and sleep, and I think everyone can agree that caffeine and sleep are interlinked, and that a lot of people have noticed or have had anecdotal evidence that caffeine does affect sleep, and a lot of studies also back that up. Like I said previously, it matters a huge amount from one person to the other. And this actually tells us here, so that one of the highlighted areas says about 2 different genes in our body and how they are basically responsible for breaking down and metabolizing caffeine in your body. So this tells us why some people can take caffeine in and out through their system super quick, didn't touch the sides, and then some people will smell a cup of coffee and they'll be pinging for 4 days. And that is something within our genes that we cannot change, which I didn't really realize. So I thought that was very interesting. Have a very high caffeine tolerance, and it could potentially be down to my genes. So that's something interesting and something to know about. But in all, caffeine has been shown to decrease or prolong sleep latency even. So that just means how long it took you to fall asleep. I think the time there was about 7 to 10 minutes extra, which potentially you might not notice, but that can over time add up to a fair bit. Obviously, there was a reduction in total sleep. Again, this varied from person to person. Decrease in perceived sleep quality. There was more interruptions in your deep sleep, and this came from as little as 100 milligrams of caffeine, which isn't even a whole coffee, or a strong coffee at least. And habitual use actually showed less caffeine attributed sleep disturbances. So that means if someone's having caffeine often, that does imply that you can get used to it and your tolerance will build up to it. So again, that does show that over time will build up a tolerance and you will have people that are more tolerant. However, still, even in those studies when they showed less disturbances, peak melatonin was down by up to 30%. Some of these studies, though, and this is again me trying to play devil's advocate and talk on both sides of the situation, some of these studies were getting people to consume caffeine like 100 to 200 milligrams, like 30 to 60 minutes prior to sleep, which I don't really think is realistic. Many people wouldn't and probably shouldn't be taking caffeine that close to bed. So that is interesting, I'd say. And again, in the bottom study here, we've got two studies did show no dose related increase in sleep latency and no effect of these variables. So it does really depend on participants. However, general rule of thumb, your caffeine half-life, depending on person to person, is going to be from like some are even saying 1.5 hours all the way up to 10 hours. I go, don't consume any more caffeine 6 hours before you go to bed, and you're probably going to be get a good night's sleep. So caffeine and side effects, adverse effects, we do know that this occurs in a number of people. Again, it is very specific to the individual. However, anxiety levels have been shown to increase around 300 milligram dose. That was a flat dosage, not in regards to body weight. Death is kind of a bad side effect. They haven't been able to study this really because you can't get the ethics to kill people nowadays, which is a bit of a shame. However, it's estimated at 10 grams, but the Northumbria University, the little clip that I've got at the bottom right there, actually gave 3 people 30 grams of caffeine by accident. They did a calculation incorrectly. Instead of giving them 300 milligrams, they gave them 30 grams. They had to go to hospital, get their stomachs pumped. Two of the participants perfectly fine now. One of them does have short-term memory loss. Last time this was updated, I don't know if that has returned yet. But again, don't be stupid with your caffeine supplementation. These are very high numbers, obviously, other than the anxiety, but you listen to your body, you'll know. There is also an increase in blood pressure, not to a huge magnitude. So I'd say if you don't have any underlying health issues, that shouldn't be something you're worried about, but you should be aware of it anyway. And I mean, if we're trying to get a pump, increased blood pressure, you're going to look a little bit more vascular for the gram. I'm not saying do it on purpose. I'm saying it could have its benefits. And caffeine withdrawal and addiction. So the study showed how people that consumed caffeine habitually, so daily, they took their caffeine away from them and they felt like they couldn't focus, they felt like they weren't as productive, and as soon as they gave that caffeine back into them, they could focus and they could complete tasks a lot more efficiently. I personally, throughout my masters, couldn't sit down in the library and work until I'd cracked open a white Monster. So I think in my final year of uni and my masters, definitely I was addicted. I don't know if it was to caffeine in particular or just Monster. But yeah, I definitely think that there is a rule or a chance of addiction. So with some quickfire questions from my Instagram. If you're not following me at Mr. Vanity Smith, you should be. There's lots of information, lots of nudes. So what else would you want? How much is too much? How much will kill me? Again, it's very personalized, but 10 grams and you're probably not going to be having a good time. Caffeine on an empty stomach, is that okay? Caffeine on an empty stomach is fine, and actually the absorption rates has been shown to increase. So if you've had a big meal, and especially a fiber-based meal, the levels of caffeine absorption will decrease. So if you have your pre-workout meal an hour before you work out, and then your pre-workout drink with caffeine in half hour before, potentially you're not going to get all of that caffeine because of the decreased rate of absorption. Did my abuse of 35p energy drinks make me immune? Not immune, but your tolerance would have increased. So potentially, yes, you can have a bit of a detox to try and reset those levels. However, if we know genetically you are more likely to be able to withstand a higher amount of caffeine, a lot probably won't change. What is my favorite source of caffeine? A Monster Mule it's changed to now, so the Ginger Monster. If I'm looking for a pre-workout though, I'd have to go Total War. What's caffeine's interference with ADD and ADHD? Again, this changes from person to person. Caffeine has been shown to increase cognition, so sort of focus and attention, so that has benefits there. However, too much and people will start to feel anxiety, which can obviously be negative. And also ADHD is likely to play up a little bit if you aren't having amazing sleep, and we've already noted that caffeine can affect sleep. Then the final question, caffeine liquid versus caffeine pills. So this was consumption, what's best? And I really like this question. This is something that I've thought about. I've never really looked into it. There's not a huge amount of studies in there. So any undergrads or postgrads even, I'd recommend this is a great study to go for. But anyway, coffee and cola, so I've made the assumption they're all liquids, was taking about 40 to 45, 47 minutes to get into your bloodstream. So this was looking at blood plasma levels of caffeine. Chewing gum, there's a lot of studies about this chewing gum, 40 to 80 minutes. It depended how long you chewed for. Sometimes you weren't getting the full dose if you hadn't chewed it correctly, they were finding. And then pills up to 2 hours. So if you're sitting in the car park and you're taking 1 or 2 caffeine pills, you're doing your session and you're leaving. If your session is only 90 minutes, I say only, that's a good length session, you could be leaving the gym before that caffeine has fully broken down and got into your body. So we need to look at the sources of caffeine you're getting. Finally, limitations of all these studies. Very hard to control habitual use, and also very hard to categorize the habitual use. So going into that, there's no uniform categories of dosage from one study to the other. One study would say, oh, this is low, where this is high, and there'd be very similar dosages. More longitudinal studies, a lot of this was all very acute studies. A lot of the sleep studies were done by questionnaires. Again, I'm more of a quantitative guy than qualitative guy. I'd prefer it to be laboratory based, and with that, it's self-perceived quality of sleep. So all in all, caffeine is an amazing supplement to take. I'd recommend it for anyone in a deficit, for anyone looking to increase performance. It is so personalized that it is very hard to give a general, well-rounded piece of advice. But most papers seemed to agree on 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight is roughly optimal for performance. Again, start low and slowly build up to that, as 100 milligrams for some people will knock their teeth out. Finally, if you did want to have a look, here are some references. The majority of the references I went through and used, a lot of systematic reviews and meta-analysis thrown in there. As always, any questions or queries, let me know, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share.